A gentle welcome to PlotFall. Tonight, our story takes us into a world that whispers from the distant past, a world profoundly shaped by the earth and the rhythm of the seasons. We journey into the quiet, often challenging, existence of medieval peasants, exploring the intimate details of 15 cheap meals they ate to stay alive. This is not a tale of grand feasts or exotic delicacies, but of humble sustenance, of ingenuity born from necessity, and of the deep, unbreakable connection between human life and the soil beneath their feet. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position, dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together, letting the gentle murmurs of the past carry you away. Imagine, if you will, the small medieval village, nestled deep within the verdant English countryside, perhaps around the mid-14th century. Here, the passage of time was measured not by clocks, but by the slow drift of clouds, the waxing and waning of the moon, and most profoundly by the turning of the seasons, each bringing its own unique demands and meager offerings. The homes were simple, humble structures, often built with woven branches plastered with mud and straw, their thatched roofs a soft, earthy brown against the sky. Inside, the air was a comforting blend of wood smoke, damp earth, and the subtle scent of drying herbs. Life was lived close to the land, and every single meal was a profound testament to tireless labor, enduring patience, and a quiet, often unacknowledged ingenuity. For the peasant family, food was not a luxury, but a daily, profound act of survival, a delicate dance with hunger that spanned every season, every daylight hour. At the very core, the pulsating heart of the medieval peasant's daily sustenance was bread. But let us gently adjust our modern understanding of this staple. This was not the light, airy, bleached white loaf that might grace a contemporary table. No, this was a dense, heavy, often dark disk, crafted from whatever grains were humble enough to grow reliably in their local, unyielding fields and, crucially, cheap enough to be within their grasp. Most commonly, you would find loaves made from barley, which imparted an earthy, slightly nutty, sometimes even bitter flavor, or the robust, resilient rye, which yielded a very dark, firm, almost chewy loaf that kept well. Sometimes, particularly in poorer regions or in times of great scarcity, oats were used, or even a desperate mix of grains with coarser legumes like peas or beans, which gave the bread a somewhat rough texture. Wheat, the esteemed grain of the wealthy, the symbol of status and refinement, was a rare luxury, seen perhaps only fleetingly, if at all, as a tiny portion of a lord's tithe, a distant dream of a different, impossibly grand life. This everyday peasant bread, while often somewhat stale by the end of the day, growing harder with each passing hour, sometimes even bearing the quiet marks of mold in damp corners, was, without exaggeration, life itself. It was the unyielding fuel that powered their arduous days, the solid foundation upon which all other meals, however meager, rested. It provided the sustained energy needed for ceaseless physical labor, a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction that quelled hunger's gnawing pangs. The preparation of this bread was a daily, sometimes even twice daily, ritual, a task that fell primarily to the steadfast women of the household, their hands worn smooth and strong from years of this same repetitive, essential labor. First, the grain, saved meticulously from the previous harvest, often stored in a simple, cool corner of the hut or a small, shared granary, would need to be processed. This often began with winnowing, gently tossing the threshed grain in the wind to separate the lighter chaff from the heavier kernels. Then came the grinding. Often, this meant hours spent working a heavy quern, two large, rough, circular stones, one rotating slowly atop the other, grinding the dried kernels into a coarse, uneven flour. The rhythmic scrape and gentle grind of stone on stone, a familiar, almost meditative sound that permeated every cottage, was a slow, laborious process, creating a cloud of fine dust. If the village was fortunate enough to possess a water mill or a windmill, often owned by the lord and requiring a fee in kind, the miller's toll, a portion of the precious grain, the grinding could be quicker, but still represented a communal effort and an economic burden. This flour, gritty and often containing bits of bran and fine chaff, was then mixed patiently with water, sometimes warmed by the hearth, sometimes cold from the well, and perhaps a precious sprinkle of salt, a rare seasoning. This mixture was then kneaded tirelessly into a rough, firm dough on a simple wooden board or a clean surface, the hands pushing, folding, shaping, building strength. The dough, once sufficiently worked, was left to rise slowly near the gentle warmth of the hearth, perhaps covered with a simple linen cloth, the quiet magic of wild yeasts working their subtle transformation, creating faint bubbles. Finally, once the dough had risen sufficiently, or was simply ready to bake, sometimes baked flat without much rise, it would be taken, often on a flat wooden board, to the communal oven. This was a large, domed structure, usually made of clay and stone, built centrally in the village and shared by all. Women would bring their prepared loaves, mark them with a distinctive pattern to identify their own, and slide them into the preheated oven using a long wooden peel. The distant, comforting smell of countless loaves baking, a pervasive aroma that drifted through the village air, was a powerful, almost spiritual promise of nourishment, of warmth, of continuity in a world where such promises were often scarce and hard-won. Each loaf, imperfectly shaped, perhaps slightly charred on its uneven crust, was a profound testament to communal effort and individual survival. It was eaten plain, or dipped in broth, or used as a trencher to soak up thin liquids from a meal. Beyond the daily bread, the peasant's culinary world revolved around the constant, simmering presence of a single, often large, cooking pot. This pot, usually made of iron or earthenware, hung perpetually over the flickering hearth fire, its contents forming the core of most meals, a broth or a more substantial pottage. This was not the rich, flavorful, clarified broth of a noble's table, with its rich meats and fine spices, but a thin, watery stew, its ingredients dictated entirely by the season, the unpredictable success of their small garden plot, and the absolute scarcity of resources. This single vessel was the heart of the peasant kitchen, constantly replenished, rarely truly empty. The creation of pottage was a gentle, ongoing process. Root vegetables, like the humble turnips, their earthy sweetness a welcome note, sturdy parsnips, providing a grounding, slightly sweet flavor, and simple carrots, with their faint, natural sweetness, provided the foundational base for this pottage. These vegetables were often pulled directly from the cold, damp earth, washed quickly in a nearby stream or basin, and chopped roughly into the simmering pot, their shapes uneven, their textures robust. Onions and leeks, with their pungent, sharp flavors, sometimes wild foraged from the edges of fields or stream banks, added a much-needed zest and a welcome sharpness that cut through the starchy blandness of the root vegetables. Perhaps, if they were lucky enough to possess a small patch of them in their garden, or found wild ones in the nearby woods, a few precious herbs, the gentle aroma of thyme, the savory comfort of sage, or the fresh green whisper of parsley or marjoram would be added. Their subtle aromas were a rare luxury of flavor, a quiet elevation of the meal from mere sustenance to something with a hint of pleasure. Meat, as we will discuss, was a truly rare, almost mythical treat. Therefore, the pottage was flavored not with meat itself, but with discarded bones, saved meticulously from previous rare meals or from a communal slaughter. These bones were simmered long and slowly, sometimes for a full day or even several days, constantly topped up with water, to extract every last bit of nourishment, every whisper of flavor, every precious drop of gelatin and marrow. The resulting thin stalk provided a deeper base than plain water. Sometimes, if the family had them, or they could trade for them, dried peas, hardy beans, often dried broad beans or fava beans, or nourishing lentils would be added to the pottage. These legumes were a vital and essential addition to their grain-heavy diet, providing valuable plant-based protein that sustained energy for their tireless work in the fields. The consistency of pottage varied widely. It could be thick enough to eat with a wooden spoon, almost a solid meal, or thin enough to drink directly from a bowl, depending on what was available and how many hungry mouths needed feeding. It was always warm, usually filling, and it was the steady, comforting core of their sustenance, eaten morning, noon, and night. The small kitchen garden, typically a modest patch of land directly adjacent to the peasant hut, was not merely a decorative space. It was a deeply practical and vital extension of their larder. Meticulously tended by the peasant family with quiet care and enduring hope, it provided a crucial supplement to their diet, a seasonal feast that varied with the gentle turning of the year, a cycle of quiet growth and precious harvest. This patch of earth, often no larger than a small room, was a continuous source of fresh produce, a quiet miracle wrought by their own hands. The work within the garden was arduous, yet deeply satisfying. It involved digging the soil with simple hoes, planting precious seeds, weeding tirelessly to remove hungry competitors, and watering carefully, often carrying water by hand from a nearby stream or well. The threat of pests, hungry birds, darting rabbits, persistent insects, was constant and required vigilance. The importance of compost, made from kitchen scraps and animal manure, and wood ash from the hearth, was understood instinctively for enriching the precious soil, a quiet form of primitive agriculture. In the hopeful days of spring, as the last of the winter chill receded, the garden began to awaken. Young greens, like the tender shoots of wild spinach, gathered from the edges of fields, and the surprising nourishment of nettles, carefully blanched to remove their sting, then boiled, offered a welcome taste of freshness, a vibrant green burst after the long, drab winter months. These earliest greens were devoured with quiet relish, promising renewed vitality. Summer brought a greater, more robust abundance. Hardy cabbages, their leaves unfurling slowly, were a staple, providing substance and versatility for salads, stews, or simply boiled. More onions and various types of beans, some to be eaten fresh as green pods, others dried for later use, ripened under the benevolent sun. Perhaps even a few precious cucumbers or a scattering of tiny, sweet wild strawberries, a true delicacy, might emerge, their delicate flavors a rare delight. These fresh vegetables, eaten simply raw, boiled gently, or added to their ever-present pottage, provided a vital variety of flavors and, crucially, much-needed vitamins and minerals that protected them from sickness and scurvy. The small garden was more than just a source of food. It was a lifeline, a testament to their hard work, their profound connection to the soil, and a source of quiet pride, knowing they had coaxed sustenance from the earth itself. Autumn was a time of relative plenty, a period of intense gathering and careful storing, with the harvest of hardy root vegetables. Large, stout turnips and parsnips, along with pumpkins and various gourds, were pulled from the earth. These were often stored in cool, dry corners of the hut or in simple, underground root cellars for the winter. Their sweet, starchy flesh provided a vital caloric addition to their meals, versatile enough for savory dishes or even, rarely, a hint of a sweet treat. This was a time to savor the fruits of their labor, a brief respite from the deepest hunger, a gentle period of communal effort and profound gratitude before the truly lean months ahead, when the earth would offer little. Every root, every seed, every last leaf was precious, carefully gathered and preserved, a quiet act of foresight. Beyond their own carefully tilled small holdings, and outside the direct control of their lord, peasants often relied on the ancient and vital practices of foraging and gathering to supplement their meager diet. This was not a leisure activity but a necessary skill, a way of gleaning the wild's gentle gifts from the surrounding landscape. The nearby woods, the open fields, the edges of streams, and even the hedgerows that crisscrossed the land were not merely scenery. They were a living larder, a silent treasure trove for those who possessed the quiet, intimate knowledge of where to look, what to identify, and what seasons brought which bounty. This profound knowledge, passed down through generations, often verbally and through shared excursions, was as vital as knowing how to plow or bake bread. The forest floor and undergrowth yielded a diverse range of edibles. Wild berries, like the tart sweetness of blackberries that stained their fingers purple, and the delicate delight of wild raspberries, provided a sweet treat, a rare burst of vibrant flavor in their often bland meals. These were often eaten fresh, a quick burst of energy, but some might be painstakingly dried or even made into simple fruit leathers for later, a small, precious hoard. Nuts, like the abundant hazelnuts nestled in their husks, gathered from the trees that dotted the landscape, and the more challenging but calorie-rich acorns, which required careful leaching, often by soaking in water for days, to remove their natural bitterness, were gathered patiently in the autumn. These provided a valuable source of fat and protein, crucial energy stores for the long, cold winter months. Children, with their sharp eyes, nimble fingers, and boundless energy, were often sent out to gather these, their small contribution an important part of the family's survival, turning a task into a game of discovery. Edible wild plants, often dismissed by others, were carefully harvested. The slightly bitter greens of dandelion leaves, harvested young in spring, the pungent bite of wild garlic, its aroma a welcome sharpness, and the mild flavor of various cresses from stream banks, were all gathered. These added a touch of variety, a hint of freshness, to their pottage or were eaten simply raw with a bit of salt. Mushrooms, with their earthy, mysterious flavors, sprouting after a good rain, were a prized find, their delicate taste enhancing their humble meals. But identifying them correctly required quiet discernment and profound knowledge to avoid poisonous varieties, a life-or-death skill passed down by the village wise folk, often older women who held this knowledge. Foraging was not just about finding food, it was about a deep, symbiotic relationship with the natural world, a quiet knowledge of the land's hidden bounty, a reliance on the wilderness for survival that underscored their humility and resourcefulness. It was a silent testament to their connection to the vast natural world. Meat, truly, was a rare and precious treat for the medieval peasant, almost a fading whisper from a different, more abundant world, a luxury mostly reserved for the nobility who held vast hunting grounds. For the common peasant, owning animals meant immense responsibility and constant care. Small animals, like their few scrawny chickens, prized more for their constant supply of eggs than their lean meat, or their single pig, often kept for a full year, painstakingly fed scraps and allowed to forage, before a communal slaughter, were considered valuable assets, representing significant capital and future sustenance. Their slaughter was a significant event, a cause for quiet celebration and meticulous preparation, ensuring nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. The scent of roasting meat, a rarity, would draw curious glances and envious sniffs from neighboring huts. On very special feast days, perhaps at Christmas or Easter, or after a communal pig slaughter that occurred once or twice a year, a small piece of pork or poultry might grace their table. This was a taste of richness that was savored slowly, every bite a moment of quiet gratitude, a profound blessing. The bones, of course, were carefully saved and added to their pottage, simmered long and slowly, sometimes for days, extracting every last bit of nourishment and a depth of flavor that was otherwise utterly lacking, a ghost of a richer meal. Even the entrails and less desirable parts, the liver, the heart, the intestines, were carefully prepared and eaten, often as blood puddings or humble sausages, leaving no part unused. Animal fat, rendered and stored, was a precious commodity used for cooking or for making simple tallow candles. Hunting was generally strictly restricted to the nobility, who guarded their hunting rights fiercely. The vast forests and game were considered the lord's property, and harsh punishments, sometimes even mutilation or death, were meted out for any peasant caught poaching. But desperation and sheer ingenuity often drove peasants to take quiet risks. They might occasionally snare a rabbit with a cunningly set trap, or catch a few birds with nets or simple slings, a welcome, if dangerous, addition to their meager fare, a small, personal victory against the odds. The quiet, illicit journey into the forbidden woods, the careful setting of a snare, the breathless wait, the quiet return, these were acts of courage born of hunger. The taste of such meat, hard-won and dangerous, was even more precious, imbued with the thrill of defiance. While less common than bread or pottage, dairy products like fresh milk and simple cheese, along with eggs, provided vital nutrients and variety for many peasant families. A family might own a single cow, a treasured beast that required constant care, or a few hardy goats, whose milk was often richer and easier to obtain in diverse terrains. These animals provided a source of milk that could be drunk fresh, often warm from the udder, or, more importantly, carefully processed into simple cheese or butter, allowing for storage and preservation. The process of milking was a quiet, intimate ritual, often done by hand, the warm milk frothing into a wooden pail. The milk, perishable quickly, was often transformed. Simple cheese making involved gently curdling the milk, often with rennet, from a calf's stomach, or a natural acid like vinegar, then pressing the curds to remove whey, and finally aging the cheese in a cool, dry place. This cheese, often hard, salty, and aged, provided a valuable source of protein and calcium, a practical way to preserve the milk's bounty for longer periods, especially during the colder months when fresh milk was scarcer. It was a dense, salty, crumbly addition to their coarse bread, a simple yet profoundly satisfying meal, offering a concentrated form of nourishment that lasted. The making of butter involved churning cream, often in a simple wooden churn, until the fat separated, a rhythmic, gentle process. Eggs, from their small flock of ever-present chickens, were another valuable source of protein and essential nutrients, their golden yolks a burst of color and richness in their simple diet. For those fortunate peasant families who lived near winding rivers, serene lakes, quiet ponds, or the vast, murmuring sea, fish provided a valuable and often more accessible source of protein, especially crucial during the many fast days and Lent when meat was forbidden by the church. Simple fishing techniques, passed down through generations, allowed them to harvest this aquatic bounty. This included patiently woven nets cast into the gentle currents, carefully baited lines dropped from the bank, simple weirs constructed in shallow streams to trap fish, or even, for the most agile, bare hands used to snatch an eel from a muddy bank. They caught a variety of freshwater fish, from small, quick trout to larger, slower carp and pike, and the serpentine, often unsettling but nutritious eel. Along the coast, saltwater fish like cod and herring were caught and traded inland. This fresh fish, when available, was a welcome addition to their diet, offering a change from the usual earthy flavors of grain and root vegetables. It was often simply roasted over the open fire, its flesh flaking apart, or boiled and added to a pottage. However, to extend its availability, fish was rigorously preserved. Salted fish, packed tightly in barrels with coarse salt, was a common preservation technique, and dried fish, hung in the sun or over slow-burning fires, became hard as wood but vital for winter. Smoked fish, cured over fragrant wood smoke, offered another distinct flavor. These preserved fish were a strong, distinctly salty or smoky flavor, sometimes overwhelming to a modern palate, but a welcome change from their usual fare, and crucially, provided essential protein during long periods of scarcity, especially during Lent. The smell of fish curing, a pungent aroma, was a familiar sign of winter preparation. While clear, fresh water, drawn painstakingly from a nearby well or collected from a flowing stream, was undoubtedly the most common and essential drink for the medieval peasant. Quenching their thirst after hours of demanding labor, they also enjoyed simple, homemade beverages like ale and cider. These were not merely drinks to hydrate. They provided a small amount of calories, sometimes a touch of gentle warmth in cold weather, and a quiet sense of relaxation after a long day's demanding work. Critically, because they were brewed, they were often safer to drink than open water sources, which could be contaminated. Ale, often brewed from barley, was a weak, watery brew by modern standards, its alcohol content quite low, making it a small beer that could be consumed throughout the day without intoxication. The brewing process, often a communal task carried out in the home or a shared village brewhouse, involved several steps. Barley was first malted, soaked and allowed to sprout slightly, then dried, to convert starches into sugars. This malted grain was then mashed with hot water, extracting the sugary liquid. This liquid was then boiled, sometimes with wild hops or other bitter herbs for flavor and preservation, and then allowed to ferment in large wooden barrels or vats. The gentle bubbling of the fermenting brew, a quiet, reassuring sound, was a familiar comfort in peasant homes. The finished ale, often unfiltered and murky, was served in wooden tankards or earthenware cups. Cider, made from the abundant apples often grown in village orchards or wild apple trees, was another popular beverage, especially in regions where apples thrived. The apples were crushed or pressed, and the juice allowed to ferment naturally. Its crisp, slightly tart flavor was a refreshing change, particularly in the warmer months. These humble brews, though simple, were a source of quiet pleasure. They were shared amongst family and neighbors during quiet evenings or communal gatherings, easing tired muscles and providing a gentle moment of shared enjoyment, a brief escape from the constant physical exertion and worry, a quiet way to bind the community together. Feast days, those precious, sacred religious holidays that punctuated the peasants' otherwise monotonous year, were truly a time of relative abundance, a brief, blessed respite from their usual meager fare. On these special days, work often paused, a welcome cessation of labor. The entire village would gather, their faces softened by the spirit of the occasion, their usual anxieties temporarily set aside. The church, as the heart of the community, often hosted these gatherings, or villagers would share food from hut to hut. Perhaps a larger piece of meat, a truly rare sight, would be served, maybe a communal roasted pig, or a specially fattened goose. This was a direct contrast to the usual thin broth, a taste of richness that was deeply savored. Special dishes prepared with extra care, a result of pooling what little resources families had, would appear. These might include richer pottages, perhaps with more vegetables or even a little added fat, or simple cakes made from finer flour, if any was acquired, or honey, a rare sweetness. These feasts were not extravagant affairs, lacking the multi-course grandeur of noble banquets, but they were deeply meaningful. They were a time to celebrate a saint's day, or the passing of a season, to give quiet thanks for the blessings they had, however few, and to enjoy a brief, communal taste of plenty. It was a powerful reminder that even in hardship, there was still room for quiet joy, for shared laughter, for the singing of simple songs, and for the deep, comforting bonds of community. These were moments of collective memory and quiet reassurance, breaking the relentless cycle of labor with a burst of communal warmth and simple revelry, strengthening the social fabric of medieval society. The simple wooden tables would groan under the temporary weight of shared bounty, and the air would hum with quiet chatter and contentment. Despite their tireless efforts, their quiet ingenuity, and their deep, intimate connection to the land, the medieval peasant's life was often profoundly marked by the terrifying and ever-present threat of famine and hardship. Their existence was a delicate balance, a precarious tightrope walk, easily disrupted by forces entirely beyond their control. A poor harvest, perhaps due to relentless, cold rains that rotted the crops in the fields, or a long, searing drought that withered them under a merciless sun, could lead to widespread hunger. A harsh, unforgiving winter, with deep snows and biting winds that killed animals and made travel impossible, or a swift disease that swept through their precious livestock, could equally spell profound disaster. During these truly dire times, the progression of famine was a slow, agonizing descent into desperation. Their already meager diet would become even more restricted, their bellies aching with a constant, hollow emptiness. Initially, food would be rationed meticulously, each crumb of bread, each spoonful of pottage, weighed and shared with agonizing care. As stores dwindled, they might be forced to eat poorer, less palatable grains, or even resort to desperate measures, eating tough, fibrous tree bark, boiled and softened, foraging for roots normally avoided for their bitterness or lack of nutrition, or consuming seeds from common weeds, anything to quell the gnawing pangs of hunger. The physical toll was immense: weakness, lethargy, muscle wasting. The emotional toll was equally heavy: despair, quiet desperation, and the silent grief of seeing loved ones, especially children, waste away. Specific diseases like scurvy, from lack of vitamin C, or pellagra, from a niacin deficiency often linked to a corn-heavy diet, though corn wasn't common in medieval England, similar deficiencies could arise, were common during periods of malnutrition. Famine was a constant, terrifying threat, a dark shadow that loomed perpetually over their lives, a deeply felt memory for many, a constant reminder of their vulnerability, their profound dependence on the fickle whims of nature, and the vast, often indifferent, world. It taught them deep resilience, but also deep, quiet fear. Prayers for relief were constant, desperate pleas to a seemingly distant god. Spices, those exotic, aromatic treasures so common and ubiquitous in our modern kitchens today, were for the medieval peasant not merely uncommon but a distant, almost mythical luxury. Their very existence was almost a whispered legend. They were incredibly expensive and exceedingly rare, having traveled vast distances, imported from faraway, exotic lands like India and the Middle East, via long and perilous trade routes that brought immense cost and risk. A mere pinch of precious black pepper, a touch of fragrant cinnamon, or a hint of fiery ginger was a dream reserved exclusively for the wealthy nobility, a mark of immense status and privilege, a world away from the peasant's humble, unadorned table. For the peasant, flavor came from deeply local, deeply familiar sources, from their own small garden and the generosity of the wild. Wild herbs, gathered with quiet care from hedgerows and forest edges, like wild thyme, mint, or marjoram, pungent garlic, grown or foraged, sharp onions, and perhaps a little precious salt, often produced locally from salt springs or coastal salt pans, but still a controlled commodity, were their only tools for seasoning. The taste of their food was honest, earthy, and direct, unmasked by foreign exoticisms. It was a diet of necessity, not indulgence, a simple palate shaped entirely by the immediate environment and the hard realities of their existence. The function of strong local flavors, beyond mere taste, was sometimes practical. Garlic or strong herbs could subtly mask the onset of spoilage in food, or simply provide a welcome, comforting punch of flavor to an otherwise bland dish. The thought of adding imported spices was as alien as flying. Preserving food was not merely a chore, it was a crucial, life-sustaining skill for the medieval peasant, an intricate art of endurance, a silent guarantee of survival through the long, lean winter months and periods of scarcity. Every method was born from necessity, requiring immense patience, hard work, and a profound, intuitive understanding of natural processes. The cycle of the year was a constant battle against spoilage, a race against time and decay. Salting meat and fish was perhaps the most common and effective technique. Layers of coarse salt were rubbed into cuts of meat, often pork or fish, drawing out moisture and inhibiting bacterial growth. The pungent smell of salting meats and fish was a familiar aroma in peasant homes during the autumn, a sign of preparation. This process resulted in intensely salty, often tough, but perfectly edible food. Drying fruits, like apples, pears, berries, and vegetables, like mushrooms, some greens, was another vital method, transforming fresh produce into shriveled but concentrated, nutritious stores. These were often spread on simple racks in the sun, or hung over the gentle heat of the hearth, or air-dried in breezy sheds. Smoking, especially for meat and fish, was another way to preserve food while imparting a distinct flavor. A simple smokehouse or a hanging space above a slow-burning, smoky fire, usually using specific types of wood, would slowly cure the food over days or weeks. Pickling vegetables in brine, salt water, or vinegar, if they could obtain it, often from sour wine or cider, offered another way to extend their life, storing them in wooden casks or earthenware pots, allowing for slow fermentation that both preserved and enhanced flavor. Root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and turnips were often stored in simple root cellars or shallow, insulated pits dug directly into the earth, where the cool, constant temperature prevented freezing and sprouting. Grains were stored in communal granaries or individual chests, constantly guarded against the insidious threat of dampness, insects, and hungry rodents like rats and mice. The constant vigilance against spoilage, the meticulous turning of drying foods, and the daily battle against pests were unending tasks. These preserved foods, though often tough in texture and strong-tasting to modern palates, were absolutely essential for survival, a way to extend the brief bounty of the harvest season into the long, cold depths of winter, ensuring that hunger did not claim them when the fields lay barren. The Black Death, a devastating pandemic of plague that swept through Europe with terrifying speed and ferocity in the mid-14th century, roughly 1347 to 1351, leaving death and sorrow in its wake, had a profound and utterly unexpected impact on the lives of medieval peasants and, consequently, on their diet. For many, it was the greatest disruption their world had ever known. The catastrophic loss of so many people, estimated to be a third, or even half, of the entire population, created a demographic vacuum, a silent, pervasive emptiness across the land. This grim reality, ironically and tragically, led to a severe labor shortage. With drastically fewer hands to work the vast feudal lands, lords found themselves in a precarious position. The surviving peasants, now fewer in number but immensely more valuable, suddenly found themselves with unprecedented bargaining power. This situation, slowly and subtly, altered the traditional feudal system. Lords were sometimes forced to offer better wages, more lenient rents, or even to allow peasants to acquire small plots of land previously held by deceased families, giving them more freedom and direct access to resources. This shift, for some survivors, could lead to a tangible, albeit slight, improvement in their diet. They might have more access to varied foods, perhaps a little more protein from animals that were now more abundant due to fewer people to feed, or a little more personal control over their crops, allowing them to retain a larger share of their harvest. However, the plague also brought with it widespread, enduring fear, profound trauma, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty that permeated daily life. Entire families vanished, communities were decimated, and the very concept of a stable future was shaken. It was a period of immense social and economic upheaval, a time of unimaginable loss. Yet paradoxically, for those who survived, it also presented unexpected, quiet opportunities, subtly altering the trajectory of their lives and their relationship with the means of their sustenance, shifting power dynamics in ways that would echo for centuries. The medieval peasant's diet was not a collection of arbitrary choices. It was inextricably tied to, and a direct reflection of, their life of relentless, arduous labor. Every single morsel they consumed was hard-won, earned through physical exertion from dawn till dusk. Their work in the fields, from the first sliver of gray light until the last fading glow of the sun, was not just their occupation. It was the very engine of their survival, what literally earned them their daily bread, their every mouthful of pottage. The calendar of their lives was the calendar of agriculture. The hopeful days of spring saw them breaking the hard earth with heavy plows, a task that strained every muscle. Summer brought the endless, repetitive work of weeding under a baking sun, protecting the tender shoots. Autumn exploded with the frantic, back-breaking labor of harvest, a race against time and weather, swinging scythes, binding sheaves, threshing grain. Winter was a period of cold, quiet chores, repairing tools, tending animals, preserving what food remained. Each of these activities was physically demanding, requiring immense strength, endurance, and a profound resilience. Their meals, therefore, were simple, unadorned, and often repetitive, but they were absolutely essential, providing the brute fuel they needed to sustain their arduous tasks. The very act of eating was a refueling, a pragmatic necessity. There was a deep, unspoken respect for food that came from such hard work. Nothing was wasted, every crumb cherished. The feeling of satisfaction after a meal, however humble, was profound, knowing it was the direct result of their own sweat and toil. Their lives were a constant, rhythmic cycle of work and rest, of sowing and reaping, of struggling to survive against the unpredictable forces of nature and the demanding will of their Lord. Their food was a direct manifestation of this harsh reality, a testament to their quiet resilience, their enduring patience, and their profound determination to simply live, to continue, to persist against all odds, generation after generation. As we gently draw our story to a close, we reflect on the meals of the medieval peasant. Though simple, often meager, and dictated by the stark necessities of survival, they offer us today a quiet, profound glimpse into a world far removed from our own abundance and conveniences. They remind us of the enduring value of honest, tireless hard work, the vital importance of community and mutual support in times of hardship, and the profound, almost forgotten, simple pleasures of a shared meal around a humble hearth, where warmth and human connection were the greatest riches. The food they ate was a direct, unfiltered reflection of their lives, a testament to their remarkable ability to survive, to endure, and even, in their own quiet way, to thrive in the face of immense, often relentless hardship. Their diet was a masterclass in resourcefulness, in making do with what was available, in coaxing sustenance from the earth, and in preserving every precious morsel. It was a diet of necessity, not choice, but it fostered a deep connection to the land and to each other. The legacy of the medieval peasant is not found in grand monuments or written histories, but in the fertile soil that continues to yield its bounty, in the quiet persistence of rural life, and in the very continuity of human existence itself. Their story is a soft whisper from the distant past, echoing through the fields of medieval village, a profound reminder of the quiet strength, the unwavering dignity, and the deep, abiding kindness that flowed through the lives of those who simply ate to live. And in doing so, they left us a timeless lesson in gratitude, resilience, and the true meaning of sustenance. Thank you for being part of tonight's journey with PlotFall. Until next time, good night.